right, you're live.
Good morning. I'm Vice Mayor Shanika Smith and the Chair of the Public Safety Committee. I'd like to welcome you all to our June 28th meeting. All council members are participating virtually. Unfortunately, Sandra Kilgore is not with us today. She's handling some family matters. To help our audience follow along, I'll state each section of the agenda aloud. We are streaming live on the Virtual Engagement Hub, which is accessible through the Virtual Engagement Hub link on the front page of the city website. We also have the option for the public to listen live by phone by dialing 855-925-2801 and entering the code 9477. For today's meeting, for today's meeting, we have the option for people to call in and comment live during the meeting. To call in live, to comment live, use the same number, 855-925-2801, meeting code 9477. Your phone will be muted and you will hear the meeting live. At this point, callers will hear. For more options, press *3. Pressing *3 will allow callers to continue to listen live and join the speaker queue. As stated on the agenda, public comment will now be heard at the beginning and end of the public safety meeting. Callers may call and comment only once during the general public comment sessions, either during the beginning or the end of public comment period, not both. Callers will have 3 minutes each. We will be taking public comment after council and staff introductions. So if you would like to make a comment, please join the speaker queue by pressing *3 now. If you're watching the meeting through the live stream while you're listening to the meeting by phone, please be sure to turn down the volume on your device before you speak. Now I'll go through and introduce our committee members and staff who are participating virtually, along with some guests we have today. Just give a quick hello when I call your name. Councilwoman Kim Roney.
Good morning.
City Manager Deborah Campbell.
Good morning.
Assistant City Manager Rachel Wood.
Good morning.
City Attorney Brad Branham.
Good morning.
Police Chief David Zack.
Good morning.
Deputy Fire Chief Chris Bazinski.
Good morning.
And we have guests with us today who will be doing presentations. We have Buncombe County Justice Service Director Tiffany Nhanacho.
Good morning.
Executive Director of Spark Foundation, Jackie Latek.
Good morning.
And the founder of My Daddy Taught Me That, Mr. Keenan Lake.
Good morning.
Thank you all for being here with us. We'll start off with public comment. Is there anyone in the speaker queue?
There's no one in the queue.
Okay, we'll go on to approve the minutes. I make a motion to approve the minutes for April.
This is Kim, second.
Okay, I'll do a roll call vote for approval. Councilwoman Roney.
Aye.
Myself, aye. Because we're the only two here, the minutes are approved. Okay, now we'll start our agenda with a presentation from Tiffany Nhanacho. She's representing the Justice Resource Advisory Council, and she's doing a presentation on community safety programs and initiatives. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Vice Mayor, and thank you for having me here. Good morning to Vice Mayor and Councilwoman Roney and all of Asheville City staff. Can you guys hear me okay? Okay. We have a presentation, so if we can put the slides up, that'd be great.
Sorry, give me 1 second. My computer is a little slow.
Thank you. Again, my name is Tiffany Nhanacho, and I am representing Buncombe County Justice Services Department. We have several initiatives, and one of our groups and advisory councils that we provide staff support to is the Justice Resource Advisory Council, which is a commission or board of Buncombe County commissioners. We have cross-sector collaboration and members on the Justice Resource Advisory Council, including members from City of Asheville, the mayor and Mayor Manheimer and City Manager Deborah Campbell also are members of the Justice Resource Advisory Council. And some of that work is cross-system collaboration to improve our responses to criminal justice, public safety, and for crisis response services. And so if we go to the next slide, I can give some background about, why we're here talking about community safety. It is one of the initiatives that the Justice Resource Advisory Council prioritized in the strategic plan, as well as one of the goals and actions from Buncombe County's Racial Equity Plan. And some background, we've been doing this work in alignment with our grant, the Safety and Justice Challenge through the MacArthur Foundation. And as we were doing research and kind of understanding the importance of why community safety and really gun violence prevention is important, if we go to the next slide, we know that both violence and justice system have desperate impacts on Black people living in Buncombe County. So in the first 7 months, 2020, there were 9 homicides and 7 of the victims were Black men. They're also disproportionately represented in our jail population and 69% of gun violent victims. Last year, we partnered with the American Association of Prosecutors, as well as Asheville Police Department in a conference. And that's referenced on the next slide. And so a crime analyst with Asheville Police Department was able to put this together. And this also shows kind of the qualitative narrative of why this work is so important. And his name is Doug from the Crime Analyst Prevention, and this came from that conference. So over the past 10 years, violence has increased and risen, violent crime, has increased in Asheville from 400 crimes to 600. As the growth of Asheville increased, there was a decrease of Black residents in Asheville. So when you look at this through a data analysis, 32% of violent crime victims have been Black, and 1/3 of those Black victims comprise of the violence crime. And so this slide is just showing you like the qualitative analysis of the numbers, but more importantly, we want to focus too on the qualitative and what we've been hearing from community. And so we've partnered with several local communities and did listening sessions. And if you can go to the next slide, we heard back from community, and this includes those who have been most impacted. And some of the things that they're recognizing is something that they feel is issues in their community is violence and shootings, systemic poverty, difference in treatment, fear of retaliation for reporting criminal activity, just overall lack of positive role models and lack of trust in the education system. Then there's also just roadblocks to restoration when people are returning from incarceration. And so we heard and we listened to community. We noticed what was going on in the data. And in late of 2020, we used some of our Safety and Challenge grant money to issue a RFP, wanting to get community-based responses to how to address kind of gun violence and crime prevention and focus more on the preventative piece and even the violence interruption piece. We received several requests for proposals. We recognized that as government officials, we didn't want to be centered in doing the work. And so we found several community-based organizations interested in partnering with us, and some of them are represented on the call today. So a part of the RFP, we broke it down into 2 phases, and on the next slide, it details what they were. So we wanted, and this was kind of our initial pilot, if you can go to one more slide. The first part of the RFP was like really working in community and partnering with these community-based organizations to develop programming that will address and prevent gun violence. The other part of that was really a comprehensive plan, recognizing that as a community, we all have shared responsibility, and how can we work better together to coordinate our efforts. And so I won't go specifically into the work that Spark and their partnership with the other providers are doing, because they'll do that after me. But we did a contract with Spark Foundation as our lead organization. and they're partnered with My Daddy Taught Me That. We were partnering with Umoja the first round, and that's changing a little bit for the second year, but they were, Spark was doing kind of workforce development and working in neighborhoods and building neighborhood capacity. My Daddy Taught Me That focused in youth mentoring. Umoja Wellness was regarding creating trauma and healing and safety circles. And then the Racial Justice Coalition, their unique perspective on this part was really researching best practices for violence interruption models. Knowing as Buncombe County and Asheville, City of Asheville, we haven't done that work yet. And so instead of recreating the wheel, we wanted to really understand best practices. And so Racial Justice Coalition was kind of tasked with doing that research and reporting back. And then the other piece of that was developing, again, a comprehensive plan. We partnered with Jordan Peer Recovery, and they received technical assistance from the Prevention Institute, which is a national renowned organization that does work in communities on gun violence prevention and a comprehensive approach. So on the next slide, this is what we've seen happen in our first year. We recognize that this is going to be ongoing work. This is something that hasn't occurred just spontaneously, but years of minority groups or just really Black communities being underrepresented and underfunded. And so starting the work is really building capacity. The group were able to meet with 70 community members to do one-on-one healing conversations. 24 members received trauma-informed resiliency. There were 17 youth that signed up in Hillcrest and Klondike. And then they were a team of 2 adults working into Asheville High School and Asheville Middle School. And then we also did community engagement activities. So the next slide is the focus of what came from the Community Safety and Prevention Plan with Jordan Peer Recovery. There were about 10 meetings that occurred over a period of 6 months that included representation from community, from our law enforcement agencies, including Asheville Police Department and the Sheriff's Office, the District Attorney's Office, schools, and just community in general. And a part of what we're seeing is kind of these themes emerging in the work. And we'll be publishing the safety plan in the weeks to come as it's in its final stages of a draft. But really the buckets are supporting healthy youth involvement and improved school climate, cultivating a thriving workforce and economic opportunities to really mobilizing community in terms of livable wages, creating narratives of hope, safety, and community, and improving the social and built environment. So really thinking about structurally how our neighborhoods are structured and improving the built environment as well as the social environment and people are living in these buildings and structures. In addition, if we go to the next slide, we can talk about the research that the Racial Justice Coalition was able to put together. And that's one more slide, and slide 11. They reported back 2 different violence interruption models, and we can provide this to you all in full detail, or have them come present on the models. But we did lean towards CHASM. So there's CHASM and Cure Violence. Cure Violence has several sites in North Carolina with a focus on gun violence. CHASM originating in Wilmington, and they're using these models across the U.S. They have more than focus on gun violence. They use 4 core strategies, including the community health worker model. And we've in Buncombe County started using community health workers in a variety of ways. And based on the report that Racial Justice Coalition did, we were leaning to more of CHASM because it has that intergenerational model. We understand the points of doing like the violence interruption, having street staff working in communities to interrupt violence, but also wanting to make sure that we're doing real intentional intergenerational work. And that's kind of the model that CHASM has. And so we were leaning towards implementing CHASM. As far as funding, on our next slide, we can talk specifically where we are. So like I said, the initial pilot was the Safety and Justice Challenge. And like I talked about early, it was the community safety program with our partnership with our community-based programs, as well as doing the strategic planning. Based on the Racial Justice Coalition's recommendation, we're seeking ARPA funds through the county to do the violence interruption model and get technical assistance from the CHASM National Network. That would include working in 3 of 4 identified neighborhoods in that violence interruption piece. We also just applied for a grant. The federal government is releasing a lot of funding towards gun violence strategies. And so in this, we are looking to do actually like a grant and program coordinator to really coordinate all of these efforts and work with you all and different partners to create a coordinated response. We are also seeking to expand the work that we did in the Safety and Justice Challenge. So the community safety funding with Spark will be ending in March. So we want to help continue that funding into the next few years, as well as creating healing spaces and training for staff. We recognize that this is trauma work and that we're working in communities that have been significantly impacted with trauma, but also the vicarious trauma that those working in the field will have. And so making sure that we honor and have space for healing as well. And we are, again, pending those potential opportunities. But as I said before, we can't do this in a vacuum, and I am grateful to be here. What this work will look like with the strategic plan and the funding that we're hoping to attain. If we scroll down to the next slide, is really a coordinated response to community safety. We were able to do this in our domestic violence and sexual assault area, where in 2015 we had one of the second highest, homicide in North Carolina related to domestic violence, and that spurred the community to get together. From that work, we were able to create the Family Justice Center. We have specialized units in APD and the Sheriff's Office for Special Victims Unit or Special Investigations Unit. The Prosecutor's Office have a Special Investigations Unit as well. We created focused deterrence for those involved or the perpetrators of harm. And so we have seen a decrease in our domestic violence. So we know coordination and community response efforts work, and we have experienced it in Buncombe County. And so what we are needing is to continue that work into our most impacted communities of gun violence as well, and creating a comprehensive strategic planning team where hopefully if we get awarded, we have a program coordinator that can provide support, but then working in these different buckets of work that have been talked about and develop this out more. So the bold is an indication of like what we already have in place on the actual like activities. The one under violence interruption models are what we're proposing and what we're hoping to get funding for. But again, like a lot of these efforts still need to be built out, including offender accountability, creating these narratives of hope and community and amongst community partners. And so this could be the start of a framework for really addressing the issue at hand. Lastly, I just want to say that this in the next slide does take collaboration and coordination from all of us, from county government is uniquely situated, but also recognizing the partnerships in this, including our other municipalities, including our school districts, those who have been most impacted being at the table, the courts, law enforcement agencies, our community-based organizations, and also working with national partners who have done the work in different communities and learning from their expertise. And so today, that's what I had presented to you. And my next slide is just to say thank you, and I open it for any questions.
Any questions from the committee?
This is Kim. Tiffany, thank you so much for being here and taking the time to make this presentation today. I certainly have had my understanding expanded. So I guess the first question I have is the news came out of the city of Durham this week that they have just dispatched their holistic empathetic assistance response teams, which they're calling HEART, who are unarmed mental health professionals to better match 911 responses to the needs of people experiencing nonviolent behavior and mental health crises. And so considering that you're leaning towards the CHASM model and that intergenerational response, has there been an opportunity to look at Durham as another city in North Carolina to maybe seek what barriers or solutions they've addressed that we might find similarity with?
Yes, and I can provide more information on any correlation. They're also doing violence interruption models as well. We do have a partnership with Durham and providing technical assistance to each other. So that definitely is an opportunity. I think a part of the work, and you mentioned the HEART program is centered around mental health and nonviolence, but I think we can't do these things in siloed, and it's not either or. It's like both and, right? And building capacity in our responses to mental health, nonviolent, but also the kind of more acute harm-causing behaviors as well. And we definitely can get some more information from Durham about that.
In the process of doing this research, have you been able to identify what are the reasons that folks may or may not choose to participate, and or in pursuing other models around the country, I've been looking to see which ones are having success with getting community members involved. Are you seeing where the success lies in getting that trust built in?
Yeah, I definitely think it is trust building. It's capacity and trust building. You know, every community is uniquely situated in how their partnerships and relationships are with local government and community-based organizations. And so we have to kind of honor our history and where we are and then help build that trust, right? And I think a part of it is to keep coming to the table. Being in Asheville and noticing and being in the different spaces and circle, we get frustrated and we might regress and just go back into our bubble. And then if we're able to continuously stay engaged and come to the table and keep having these discussions, that's a way to definitely build trust. And I think that might be unique to what Asheville can do, or just our community can do to help get community engaged, but also get local government and our other agencies involved. Is really listening to each other. There was some great work that CUNY is doing with communities and capacity building. They are creating healing spaces. And they're kind of a neutral setting where they're working with law enforcement and communities impacted and creating spaces for conversation. And that has helped build out the work. And we're talking in places where, like Alabama, where they're trying to create the space. So I think leaning into people who have done the work before and their expertise can also help leverage where we are in terms of trust building.
That makes sense. I know when I've looked at the ceasefire strategy out of Oakland, and they've been through multiple iterations of trying to reinvent that model and try new things. It seemed that the opportunity to pay community members was a big success turning point. So I wasn't sure if that's on the table through the proposal, but it certainly would be something to consider as we move forward.
Thank you. That is some considerations about, we do have funding and stipends available, but I would love to really see how they're using their funding to support community members. Thank you for that suggestion.
Thank you for being here today.
Tiffany, how has Asheville Housing Authority participated in coordination?
Yeah, they have been an invaluable partner. They have when we first got awarded the Safety Justice Challenge funding and we started doing our community engagement, they have been a partner throughout. They helped coordinate us with their residence council. They were integral in us getting into these communities and having conversations to do our initial listening sessions and coming up with creative ways. So they have definitely been at the table, and they've been one of our members that have stayed at the table.
Have they been integral in helping to develop and test strategies?
Yes, and I think what we've been doing in our partnership too is because we all recognize we are these governmental structures, and so really partnering with community and having those open conversations. But they have been at the table with this effort as well.
I'm just thinking about that in regard to improving the built environment, and I know there's some crime prevention strategies that we use through environmental design, and one that worked in the past that wasn't very popular, but is access control, natural surveillance, and activity support. So there are a few things. I'm just wondering where they are and in helping to lend voice to strategies that could work. And when it comes to implementing strategies that are popular or that seem to be getting some leeway, how are they cooperating with implementing those strategies?
I can get back to specifics, but I know they have been at the table and they've been working as we make suggestions and going and testing. But I can I can get more specific information.
Okay, thank you, Tiffany. With no more questions from the committee, I think we'll dig into the violence interruption model. Let me go to
Before we move on, I would just welcome the opportunity to have this team come back once we have a next step or data set to review, and maybe we could put that on our long list of future agenda items.
I agree. Thank you. Next, let's talk to Jackie Latek and Mr. Keenan Lake. Give us an update on violence interruption programs and strategies that you are using.
Keenan's going to go first here. Go ahead, Keenan. You're muted.
Keenan, if you're talking, you're muted. We can't hear you. We can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
We can. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I'm so sorry. I'm actually trying to do two things at once. I got a bunch of young people down here at the TD Bank trying to get bank accounts. But anyway, with the model that we've done and the things that we've been doing, when I hear the report that Tiffany did, which was really good, thank you, Tiffany, for the report, and then Ms. Kim, the questions that you asked about the Durham model and stuff like that, I think one of the things that we all can agree on is that things in Asheville are moving very differently. Myself, Jackie Latek with Spark, we have been sitting on meetings with one of the reasons that this street team and committee is so valuable. We've been sitting on meetings for the last 2 years with our U.S. district attorneys. Fred Hudson, it used to be Andrew, now it's Dina King, and they have been giving us great information about the violence that we're experiencing here in Asheville and the concern, to the point where last month I sat on a national committee, the PSN National Summit, and what I would like this committee to know, what this board to know, is that we're doing some very good things. So when we're looking at other models, a lot of times folks are looking at what we're doing. When I was on this national model, this national panel, the entire committee, I was on the youth violence part of that panel, and they were more interested in what we were doing here in Asheville with the work that we're doing. So what we do is this. We created a system where we designated and picked out specific communities that we want to target. We started off with with Hillcrest and Klondike, and all of 2021, those were the cities that the counties and the communities that we focused on. Now this is in the middle of COVID, where folks are not wanting to come out, folks are not really wanting to be, interacting and stuff. And so we started with the elderly. We have a person leading the elderly and helping out with the elderly, getting them out of the house, doing stuff such as bingo, taking these elderly folks to the grocery store, being able to have things in their community that they can not only and interact and attend, but have their voices heard as well. We're actually doing things like, for example, we're going to have another one this coming Friday, July 1st. We started in Beaverview. 3 weeks ago, we partnered with Clarence Robinson and Cooking with Comedy. We paid for, I think we served over 88 individuals, 8 for free. We had the music and the music on the basketball court going. The kids came out. And so one of the things that we are priding ourselves in doing is building the relationships, the boots on the ground work, meeting the folks not only where they are, but allowing them to be able to come together, have camaraderie in their community, but then take ownership of their community. It's one thing for us to be there. It's another thing for them not to only have buy-in, but to have a say about what's happening in their community, and then having those folks lead the way. With our youth, of course, we're having all kind of things happening with our youth, but the major thing that we're dealing with is really trying to find out where the violence is coming from, how we can be responsible for helping stop the violence, and then giving our kids outlets, particularly our young folks. I think it was 2019, 2020, one of those two things. I think we had 44 shootings. I think we have law enforcement on the phone. They can fact check me. I think we had 44 shootings in 2019. I think 37 of those shootings, and these were deaths by shootings. 37 were young African American males. And so, how are we gonna end this violence, or at least help try to stop this violence? One of the things that I think Tiffany mentioned is that applying for more funding is one thing, but between the two entities, the city and the county, we have to start creating outlets for our youth. There's nothing for our youth to do. There's nowhere for them to go. It's summertime, and we know how Asheville is constructed. Our kids don't come downtown. They don't come downtown, and they don't really leave their silos. They're in Hillcrest all day. They're in Klondike all day. They're in Pisgah View, Diva View. They're in those places pretty much all day. And with nothing to do, no outlets, nowhere to go. We don't have a Dave & Buster's. We don't have a HBCU. We don't have things for our kids to get involved with. So they resort to what we see, which is the violence. We're trying to create an organic street team to where we can assess, we can help, we can apply and make sure that not only our youth, but the families of those youth have things as well. I can't talk enough about the work that our team we're constantly doing, to the point to where as soon as a violent incident takes place, we're in those communities, to the point where the communities tell us, particularly in Hillcrest, we know what you guys are doing, we love what you're doing, but this is not a good time to be here. We don't want you guys to be caught up in stuff that's going to create an unsafe environment for the team. So, it's good that you guys are not here for this week or for a few days. And so it's been really difficult to gauge the temperature of communities when there's so much violence happening. What community can we go into? Which community should we be in? How do we do this? And because this team has been put together where a community has the trust, I think that's very clear. Kim, I think, to answer your question too, all these things coming from other cities can possibly work, can possibly do us some good. But again, Asheville is different. And if you don't have people going into these communities who can be trusted and see and know that they have their best interests. For example, several years ago, we were talking about the grant that over in Pisgah View. Our people are, it's almost like they've been petri death and prodded and poked for the numbers. And so when other organizations come in, or people coming in, it's like, here we go again. How long are they going to be here? How do we do this? And so, not getting off on a tangent, with this team, we've been able to build those relationships organically and gain the trust of the community. I think that is going to be some of the most significant work that we can possibly do. So when the communities know when we're coming into those communities, they know what to expect. Before I let Jackie say a thing, this is what we're planning on doing for the future. So potentially, maybe some of our leadership, you guys might want to attend. This Friday, I think Reggie Richardson is going to be there as well. He's coming up. We're going to be in Lee Walker Heights, or Maple Crest, the new name. We're going to be there at 4 o'clock. From 4 to 7, Clarence will be cooking. We're going to be having free food. Music's going to be playing. We're going to have a couple of games, for the kids to be playing. It's going to be a really great community vibe, just like it was in Diva View a few weeks ago. One of the things that I can't stress enough is our community needs to see our leaders. They need to know that some of these things that they're going to be there as well. You guys are more than welcome to attend. Come, shake hands, see the community. July 16th, we're going to be in Pisgah View, and we're going to be doing some of the same things. But what we're also doing is reaching out to some of the leaders in those communities. So in Pisgah View, we know that like Teej, who is Keisha Davidson and Michael Garner's son, he's a kind of a famous rapper. We're going to get him. They do a lot of work. They have an organization and a foundation, I think it's called Hunted Entertainment or something like that. They're going to be there not only performing, but doing things with the youth as well. So making sure we're partnering with those kind of organizations and entities as well who are in these communities to say, look, we're going to be here on this day. We're going to be giving out free food. What can you possibly bring to the table? How can you come out to, help with some of this Stop the Violence? As a result, when we reached out to that other organization, they said this is exactly what they want to start doing. So they want to help us with some of the other communities that we visit. So when we go to Livingston and Erskine, when we go to Klondike, when we do that, we'll have more buy-in. And so the more that we can get on board from the communities, being able to say we want to really be able to help this, do our part, play our role, I think we'll start to see some of the violence change along with the CHASM programs. And then, quite frankly, I think one of the things that might not have been discussed, and maybe Jackie's going to say something about this, is the mental health piece. We got to figure out a way to get mental health for our communities. Ms. Latek, it's on you.
Awesome. Thanks, Keenan. So what I wanted to share with you all is a bit of a reiteration of what you've already heard from Tiffany and Keenan. I won't be as eloquent, but I'm going to say it anyway, and it's a little bit of a repeat. But in some of this information you already know before we showed up here today, but just to give you the context, in 2020, there were 11 homicides in Asheville. In 21, there were 10. So far in 22, we're at 8, and we're heading into summer when violence historically does increase. So whether the news articles indicate gun violence is up or down at any particular moment, the fact is remaining that people living in these communities are negatively impacted on a daily basis. In the last month, Keenan has had to tell kids in his program to literally stay inside because the concerns about retaliation were really valid. We've had the older adults, as you heard him say, tell our street team members, please don't come into the community right now to conduct programming. It's unpredictable. It's unsafe. We're staying inside, and we don't want you guys to get hurt. So, Keenan spends half his time driving through the neighborhoods just to try to determine if it's safe enough for our street team to be in there. And as soon as we feel like we can do that safely, we head back in. Over the last year, you heard from Tiffany that the Racial Justice Coalition had done this research. And along with Tiffany and her team, we've talked with providers who run these programs. We've talked with city and county staff across North Carolina. And we identified that Asheville is missing this particular strategy. So I want to lay out a 3-tiered strategy that we learned from Charlotte as kind of a comprehensive approach to preventing gun violence that will illustrate this gap for us. So the first tier is prevention work. So that's your youth development programs and community mentoring. We have that in Asheville. We have Keenan in his program. They need more robust funding, but we do have that. I'm going to skip to the third tier, which is the longer term response to violence. Those are reentry programs and restorative justice. We have those in Asheville. So that second tier, that immediate response to violence, that is our gap. And these are the violence interrupter programs. So you heard about Cure Violence and CHASM, and we've had conversations with individuals and groups from both of those agencies. So as a director doing community-based work, I typically tell my staff to always remove themselves from any situation in the community if they feel unsafe. However, a community health worker who's focused on violence interruption is told to go to that violence, to mediate conversations with the most at-risk people. So in order to do that safely and productively, Asheville providers require training and ongoing support from one of those evidence-based models. There needs to be sufficient infrastructure in our community and support for this team. And there needs to be an all hands on deck approach to this public safety crisis. As Tiffany talked about, in 2013, we had 8 domestic violence related homicides. All the work that brought the community together to create the Family Justice Center, trainings for law enforcement, greater collaboration, you heard that those were effective. And we need this kind of collaborative approach to address gun violence effectively. We'll need investment from the county, from the city, from other grant sources to ensure that the program is fully funded and reaches those outcomes we desire. What is critically important, what we've learned from being in community, is there's a lot of things that lead to mistrust in the community. One of those pieces is providers showing up to do things, and then funding goes away and providers leave. And there's just this burnout from that kind of cycle happening. If we address gun violence with one of these programs, we're not going to solve this in the next couple of years. This funding, we need to be ensured that this is going to carry forward far into our future. Otherwise, we're not going to get those outcomes. So this is not a short-term strategy at all, but that's why it's going to take all hands on deck. Your interest in having this conversation with us is just critical. So I just wanted to thank you all for inviting us here today and allowing us to discuss this. And I know we'll be talking more with you about all this. Thanks.
Thank you for coming. Thank you for sharing so much information. A lot of this information we know. We're just kind of looking for more strategies and how to advance the work that's been done. Any other questions from the committee? Any comments, further discussion?
Well, thank you both for the work you do. I know that in a lot of our conversations, we've been talking about what needs to come next and whether or not it's a concept or it's a reality. And when I see the work that groups like My Daddy Taught Me That, My Sister Taught Me That, and also Operation Gateway, which is Philip Cooper's new work, that's not a concept. That's the boots on the ground. That's the relationships being built. And that takes a lot of time and a lot of resources and a lot of heart. So I'm really thankful for the folks in our community who are doing that. What I heard today is a need for space, that our young people need a place to be, to have that sense of belonging. And for funding that isn't going to be turned over every single time that a pilot ends, but an opportunity for longevity, so we can go beyond the surface and establish some deep roots. And the reason I brought up the Durham model is because in talking with elected officials from Durham, it took them a year to get from the place of freezing the positions to moving through the strategy with community, to identifying the needs, to making the job listings, to making the post for that long-term strategy. It took time and it took intention. What are you seeing as a potential opportunity or are ways that we might be getting in our own way when it comes to space and funding? Have you been able to identify any of those? I imagine the cost of space, for example, could be a barrier.
I think the space issue is absolutely something that I hear from Keenan a lot about. He shared with me some of the feedback he got after the Deaver View event a couple weeks ago. Some of the parents said to him, it was just really nice to let my kids be outside running around and feel safe in that moment with that group being out there. That's incredible that people aren't feeling like they can even go outside. Most of our communities, there is like playground equipment, there's picnic tables. People can't use them because they don't feel safe. So yes, there is a space need. I know, this is where Keenan really can talk more about his space needs. He has the programming and he has space at the mall right now, but a more useful space for him, I know is something critical. I'd let him talk about that. I need to speak for you.
So thank you, Jackie. So yes, Ms. Roney, that's one of the greatest needs. We do know, and I've had conversation with several people about space for a very long time. We've been trying to find space for a long time, and this is specifically just the My Daddy Taught Me That program. But, when you think about the future, what would our kids deal with? One of the reasons that the program is so successful is because we have provided a safe space, like Jackie said, for our youth who trust the process, who trust what we do, who trust that, things are going to be good. What we have been proposing, is that we do know that the Stevens Lees, the Reed Centers, well, not Reed anymore, but like the Montforts and stuff like that, there are rec centers, but those rec centers are not ideal. And what I mean by that is this, because those things closed in around 2008, we have a generation of youth who pretty much haven't used those facilities in that 14-year span and who have been raised outside of that. And so they have it doesn't mean, for me, Stevens Lee was my everything. That's where I played basketball. That's where my dad was at. And so Stevens Lee meant something different than it does to the kids of this generation. Those facilities can be open. That just doesn't mean that kids are going to actually go because they've never been. And so why would they go now? Over in Montfort, when we visited Montfort, this was several weeks back when Mr. Richardson came through, there was, I think, one kid of color in that entire facility. And so you're talking about, places where that have been, not only gentrified, but are no longer being used. And I'm sure you guys know this. what we need is a space for all our kids. Now, of course, we need one for programming, but what I also know is that because we have so many youth in our program, they attract other youth. And so 5, 6 days a week, if we had a place that was open for, that we can run and manage and have, it wouldn't necessarily need to be programming 5 or 6 days a week. It would be a place for youth to come and hang out, come and feel and have something to do. Again, one of the challenges I feel is bad in Asheville is because our kids have nowhere to go. They have nothing to do. There's no Dave and Buster's, there's no go-karts, there's no Fun Depot anymore. There's nothing for our youth to be, skating rings. There's nothing. And so providing an outlet, providing a place for our kids to congregate, go safely. And one of the things that our kids are tired of are being in places where they have to feel, Jackie alluded to this, feel like, okay, we're going to go to this party, we're going to go to this, but it might get shot up. Some act of violence may very well be expected to happen. And so creating an atmosphere where they don't have to worry about that is ideal. Asheville needs that yesterday.
I agree with you, Kanan. But here's a challenge to me. Your program is excellent, but it doesn't appeal to all children. So if there needs to be multiple programs that create multiple safe space for our children to be, it seems like that's half the battle. But we know the greatest influence in a child's life happens at home. And I think that's what the greatest battle, one of the greater battles is right now. We give them these pro-social activities in a program, and, we give them all the skills and the love and the nurture that they need in this space, but they still have to go back home. They still have to go back to the neighborhood. They still have to go back to family influences. So how do we do both? How do we create an escape and then also safety in their home and in their immediate environment?
The idea for that, Assistant Mayor, is this. So, give you a perfect example. Fun Depot was on the market about 1.5 years ago. That building, they sold that building. That building is huge. That space has enough space for multiple organizations to be, but it also has a commercial kitchen. It also has a lot. And so what you're talking about is the end game, right? That's the dream, to really be able to get these kids, first of all, either out of the communities, which the violence is perpetuating itself, so they won't be subjected to that. We know that, again, a kid can come to My Daddy Taught Me That Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and even do work on Saturday. But like you eloquently stated, that kid has to go back home. That kid is going to be subjected to whatever it is that they're walking back to, either in their home or in their community. The only way that I know how to do this is if we get community involved. And what I mean by that is this. So if the kids come, typically parents come. If we have a place for our youth, so let's just say we have a place where our youth are, they have, again, like the Fun Depot building, there's a commercial kitchen. So we have people in there making food. What my idea was that we have some of our local vendors who have food trucks come into that space, they cook. Then you have the kids who have food, you have parents who will come and eat. You start creating synergy around that. So when you have parents, you have the kids, you have the community, then you start building. Then you start adding different components to that. And so you have the community being involved, you have the parents being involved, and then that way you can start having other entities and start reaching our parents. We know that these things are happening in your home. How can we help you either find funding? Then you start having that protocol, that's the social worker in me coming out. You start reaching them that way. It's never going to be built, in my opinion, until we start getting the youth access and then buy-in from the families. We know that our families, our parents, some, not all, we know the struggles that they're dealing with. Just like one of the things that we're dealing with in Hillcrest now is this. I think Terrell is there right now. We're in Hillcrest 2 to 3 times a week with our elderly, and all these elderly have their kids live there and the kids' grandkids are there. Part of the issues are that none of the old people or none of the older people want to come out of their homes because of what's happening with the violence. If we could start bridging that gap and again, start having those communities take ownership. The old people want gardens. They want to do this. Okay, fine. We could have a space for that. How about the younger kids want to have access to like block parties or events? We were talking about having a projector come and having a green on the screen on the green type event. It has to be centered around the community, what they want, but then having the buy-in. But then also, again, my thing is this, and this is not me speaking for the team. I want to be able to have our communities come out of those communities simply because of this. One, we know that, again, the communities that we're trying to help and save and that with all the violence takes place, that's what's happening. It's going to be nothing but violence being bred, and we're putting individuals and youth right back into that. Again, it is what it is. That's where people have to live. That's where people have to stay. But we also know that downtown Asheville has nothing for particularly people of color. How about we start doing things to get people out of those communities to enjoy Asheville as a whole? Our tourists come here and enjoy it as a whole. Why can't the natives enjoy it as a whole? Why can't people of color enjoy it as a whole? But then we're starting to build bridges. We're starting to allow the outsiders, who, so to speak, who want to get involved, who want to help, come back in and help. I think Jackie said this better than anything. It has to be all hands on deck. And there's not a right answer that can say this one thing is going to do it. It has to be a conglomerate of things that's working together to make this happen.
Which begs a larger question, like how is our tourism development working against us in this instance? We know that there is a certain attraction. They attract middle-aged white women, and that's their target. Their target is not to enhance or to develop any type of experience for the family. So when you have that disconnect, then the families, the communities don't benefit. But if there was a turnaround in how we think about our tourism philosophy, it should serve the families and the community just as much as it attracts people into our community, then we have a different story. I went down to Waynesville, which is the closest roller rink there is. And when I tell you, it looks like the overhead was low. I mean, it didn't look like much was put into it. It looked like something that is low-hanging fruit for just one of our industries here, like our brewers. They could easily invest in something like that. A young man came to the last city council meeting. He had another brilliant idea, and this is not a multi-million-dollar thing. He was talking about a water park. I mean, there's low-hanging fruit. We just have to want it, and we have to give them a why. And I do believe we have a strong why. We just have to go to the table and start having these conversations. Every need that you mentioned here, Mr. Lake and Ms. Latek and Ms. Inhana Cho, I don't believe it is impossible. I think it takes a deeper level of coordination. And that's why I was speaking about, hey, where is the housing authority here? And it's not to target the housing authority or to speak into those stereotypical narratives about housing authority. But when we start to make advancements in housing authorities, I believe then we begin to make deeper strides into what we do. The lack of trust, building safety networks that are not only in our programs that are an escape away from our housing environments, but creating safety within our within immediate neighborhoods. And I believe it's possible. We continue to hear in this meeting that community members really believe that the residents of these communities are not the ones who are inflicting the injuries on our communities. They're outsiders coming in that are breeding violence. So how do we start to have these hard conversations? Yes, it's going to be uncomfortable if we control access. Yes, it's going to be uncomfortable if there's more police presence. Yes, it's going to be uncomfortable when our elderly began to stand up with proper backing to say enough is enough. But I do believe that we've reached several turning points. Every time that there is a killing, people are ready. They want to connect. They want to join. They want to volunteer. They want to see something happen. And I just believe that, collectively, we dropped the ball. So I'm glad that you all are here. I know that our law enforcement leadership have been involved. They probably share a lot of frustration, from things not advancing when they need to advance, and us being hamstringed so many times because we don't have the trust that we should have. But if trust saves lives, then how do we build the trust?
I have a curiosity here when we're talking about funding and long-term strategies for public safety. Hearing what the Vice Mayor has said too about hearing stories from young people, I hear a lot from students about them asking me, do you know what it's like to grow up in Beer City, USA? And their responses that they've offered so generously have deepened my understanding about that sense of not having a sense of place and belonging. When it comes down to opportunities for those places, I wonder if from today's presentation, if it might be possible for a step forward for us to put this in a formal way, a recommendation, whether it be to planning and economic development or something, to consider for future bond programming, what it could look like for the city to be a partner in a facility. I imagine partners at the table could include Dogwood Health Trust, the Tourism Development Authority, the city and the county coming together to acquire that space and make sure that it's ready for the long haul. But it's not going to get out of this recommendation if we don't make some instructions. So sending it for a staff request to look at bond programming would be my first best suggestion.
I can support that. Any other comments from the latter part of our discussion? Jackie, some light bulbs go on for you. Tiffany?
I think we all kind of described eloquently what it could look like, and I just don't want to, I'd be remiss to say that, we have to keep these conversations going. Usually they're just one-off, we need to address this, and then it doesn't keep coming to the forefront of our minds and we drag off. What we're talking about is really preparation for the next generation, right? We know we have to address these issues now, but we have to make sure that it's sustainable. Even something that Keenan said, and it didn't hit me. I knew about it, but the multi-generationals living in these small communities, it's when we talk about affordable housing, all of these things are so interconnected, right? And creating spaces for generations to leave the home and find their own space, and building up the capacity for individuals and credit building, credit worthiness, or understanding finances. These things are so much connected, and we just have to keep building and making sure that we're addressing all strategies. Because one space is great, but if we look back, me as someone who lived in Asheville as a youth, or come to Asheville as a youth, there was more than one thing to do. Rec Park was functional. The Skate USA, it was in Weaverville, but we got there, that was functional. The mall and all its havoc of we don't want kids going there, but there was continuously things to do, and there was partnerships from City of Asheville and other youth programming that created more than just one space. If it's not Keenan's program, there was another program. There has to be this continuous approach. And that's really about building capacity. In the same way we build all these breweries, we need to be thinking about how we're building space for our youth and the people that live here and have lived here for generations. So thank you for letting me share that.
I like that, Tiffany. It brings a point. If sometimes the answer is just in the reflection. You were right. There were more than one skating rink. Then you could go to Sliding Rock. And I went to every single summer recreation program, from Montford to Weaverville. Each year I chose a different location. Even if it was away from the neighborhood I lived in, there were just multiple opportunities. Even if you were an athlete, there were opportunities there for those students. If you were an artist, there was just a lot going on. But I think the barriers now, as opposed to then, we have a lot of people who are influential in community and have a heart for children who no longer can afford to live here. So I think your mic is on. I don't know if you're meaning for the mic to be on, but
So I'm curious, Deborah, maybe you can help us fill in. I know we're talking about future funding streams, like whether or not we'll be looking at a dedicated funding stream for transit, what kinds of things would be on the ballot. Where would be a next best place for folks to come together or to send information around future funding strategies, bond programs, for example?
So we're just, kind of hopefully we'll be finalizing a budget process tonight. And I think it is what Rachel is going to talk about in terms of creating a work program for not only public safety, but for finance and HR, where we would be thinking about what are our future capital needs or what are our future just overall funding needs to move forward. But I do want to reflect back on some things that have been said. If Vice Mayor, if I could get the time, and hopefully Kim, that responds to your question. I think it is. I think it's some committee work that needs to be done to assess our financial capability to take on more debt. I mean, it's literally as simple as that, and to determine all of the other competing needs that we have for sidewalks, for drainage improvements, for there's, they're numerous. And I'm not saying that to say or to suggest that public safety needs to be, kind of looked at holistically, because we think sidewalks, streetlights, all of that add to community safety. And so that's our approach with reimagining. We're reimagining public safety to address the needs of the whole person. And Vice Mayor knows whenever we have kind of our one-on-ones, my conversation is about the whole child. If we're talking about youth issues, we have to address the whole child. We have to address, like you said, the schools, all of their experiences. And whether that is solely a responsibility of the city, absolutely it isn't. And that's why we need the partnership of a Jackie and a Keenan and a Tiffany in order for us to do this, and all the nonprofits that are doing admirable work in this space. So lastly, I will say that when I first came here as your city manager, Kenyon and I had lots of conversations about this issue. We've made progress in terms of connections with people, a nonprofit in Florida that is helped Kenyon. But all of this centered around space. Where can we kind of host the things that are needed to expand this effort? We're continuing to have those conversations. And I think over the next couple of months, we may have some more possible ideas about a path forward in terms of working to see if we can find that additional space. But again, we're still just pursuing, and this is almost a culmination of 3 or 4 years of conversations around this important issue. But yeah, I'll stop there and hopefully I wasn't too verbose in my response.
You're just fine. And I take it that from this conversation, more ideas will come. And I do believe you're exactly right, Deborah. As these ideas come up, we'll have to, shoot them to the appropriate committee. But just like our response to crime has been a coordinated effort, I do believe that the prevention of crime and making sure space, programming, outlets for our children, that has to also be a coordinated approach too. And some of it's just not within the city's wheelhouse, but we have to, from this conversation, we have to figure out what we can handle, what we can manage, and what we just need to probably advance by convening conversations with the proper authorities and funders so that we make sure that the children within our city and their families are served, because it's not only the children, but it's the families as well. So I have some ideas, and thank you, Councilwoman Roney, for driving it into, like, how do we take this conversation into an actionable item that we can have a conversation about so that we can, see some fruit. So thank you all. We've had a really robust conversation and we have one more agenda on the item. So for the sake of time, we'll move on. Thank you for our guests being here. If you have to go, you can go.
Everybody.
We're going to kick it to Rachel Wood to discuss the development of an annual committee work plan. Rachel.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. And as Deborah mentioned, actually the powerful conversation that was just had is an excellent segue into discussing the need to have a little more intentionality around how we structure the work of council committees, ultimately to ensure we're achieving those intended outcomes set forth in your strategic priorities and set forth in your vision. So today we're going to give just a quick overview of the process we're going to be going through over the next several months to develop work plans for each of the council committees that will then inform work of staff, inform work of advisory boards, and then also inform how we're adding nonprofit boards, nonprofit agencies to the conversations and planning in advance what we're going to be discussing at future committee meetings, again, to make sure we're tying back to that ultimate intended outcome in the instance of this committee to further public safety across the community. Next slide, please, Jenna. So key takeaways for today: the city council committees were established to review policy matters and ultimately make policy recommendations. The city council's strategic priorities each year inform how council committees should focus their energy and focus their dialogue throughout the year. Annual work plans, once established, will serve as a useful tool to help plan for and better organize the work of city council committees, as well as city staff and advisory boards. And committee work plans can then provide specific assignments to those advisory boards, which will ultimately inform future policy recommendations made by the council committees back to the full city council for consideration. Next slide, please. So obviously the city council's vision is the broad overarching aspirational state that we would like the community to be in. The city's vision, I believe, was established in 2018, along with the city council's focus areas. And those focus areas were intended to provide a little more specificity in how specifically we could achieve that aspirational vision. And then each year, the city council establishes during their retreat the strategic priorities. This year, back in March, you established 6 strategic priorities. And those are really that 1 year focus on what are the projects, initiatives, and tactics that we as staff, the council committees, advisory boards, and in our partnerships with other community agencies, how can we ultimately move the needle to achieve those intended outcomes established in our focus area vision and our vision for the community. Next slide, please. So operationalizing those strategic priorities is really how we see work plans being that tool, not only to make sure that we're working on the right things, but also to establish a communication mechanism so that we can report back progress to city council as a whole, as well as the community and council committees on the progress that we're making to ultimately address and achieve those intended outcomes. So at a very simple definition, the committee work plan identifies what should be done to actualize the priorities. So that's the what is the committee work plan. And then the advisory boards and staff work plans, we're actually developing departmental and organizational work plans right now as well, really focus on the how. How specifically are we going to achieve these strategic priorities that we can then report back policy recommendations, potential programs, initiatives. In the instance that was just described, it might be facilities and looking at a longer term bond program that we would then bring back recommendations for the committee to consider, to provide feedback, potentially send information back to staff, and ultimately develop a final recommendation that the committee would then take forward to full council for consideration. So this is just to add some structure and some intentionality around how are we going to use this upcoming fiscal year to ensure that we are doing all that we can within the space of community safety to really move the needle in several key priority areas. Next slide, please. So just to further delve into the work plan concept, as I mentioned, each year City Council establishes their strategic priorities, typically during the council retreat. Those priorities inform council committee work plans, which outline key areas of focus throughout the fiscal year. And then from those work plans, specific assignments on programs, projects, policy areas are then made to advisory boards as well as to staff to research and work through during the fiscal year. Advisory board agendas are then centered on the work assigned from the city council committee. So this really provides a little clarity to the advisory boards on how they should be structuring their time and their agendas. And then we're going to build in a process for those advisory boards to report back to the city council committees the progress and the status of the work that they're doing, in addition to having staff make presentations on the associated work that we're doing in that space as well. From there, the council committees will use that feedback from the advisory boards, from other community groups who report back to develop policy recommendations. And then those policy recommendations will ultimately be considered by the full city council. Next slide, please. So really simplistic example, you have the strategic priority in the upcoming fiscal year of reimagining public safety. This would be the committee that would be the primary, but certainly not the only committee that would be focused on that strategic priority area. And so from there, there's work currently underway to work on the noise ordinance review. And I know Ben Woody and his team are working with the Noise Advisory Board to review the impact of decibel levels permitted in the noise ordinance. So once the research and work of the advisory board is to a place where there's something that they're ready to report back, they would then be placed on an agenda for the Public Safety Committee to consider their recommendations. Once there's dialogue had with the committee, then ultimately the City Council would consider those decibel level recommendations and potential revisions to the noise ordinance. So that's just a very simple example of how this flow and structure is being envisioned currently. Next slide, please. So next steps, we actually made a similar presentation last week to the Housing and Community Development Committee. While we really need all of the committee work plans working in concert so that we can make sure, again, that we're achieving the intended outcomes of the strategic priorities, we are looking at piloting the HCD committee to develop a work plan in concert with several of the advisory boards, including AHAC and HIAC, as well as some of the ARPA funding recipients, just to think through how are we setting agendas, setting project scopes, and ultimately developing those feedback mechanisms so that the HCD committee is aware of the different projects and programs that are happening throughout the year to ultimately achieve intended outcomes established in the strategic priorities. Based on our experience developing the HCD work plan, we'll be developing and drafting work plans for all of the city council committees. And of course, we already have lists of agenda items, and we want to take those lists of agenda items and look at them with a little more strategic and intentional lens on how are those lists of items, how are those potential presentations from community groups ultimately tying back to our intended outcomes and making sure that we are achieving the goals set forth by the City Council. Our hope is by October that we will finalize the work plans for all City Council committees as well as the associated advisory boards. And then we're looking at, and it may be more frequently than quarterly or less frequently depending on the subject matter, but having that regular reporting back from the advisory board so that the City Council committees can hear directly from the board members on the status that is being made based on the assignments that are given via the work plan itself. Next slide, please. So just to reiterate, and the key takeaways, the council committees were established to review and make policy recommendations. City Council's annual strategic priorities inform the work of council committees each year. And annual work plans will serve as a useful tool to help plan for and better organize the work of council committees. And then work plans will also provide specific assignments for advisory boards to help make future policy recommendations that the committees will then bring to full City Council. So that is a really brief overview of the concept. But again, the dialogue that took place today kind of helps emphasize where we're trying to go to add some intentionality and make sure that we're working on the right things, that we're bringing the right partners together throughout the year so that we can make sure that we're making those long-term improvements on the intended outcomes set forth in the city's vision as well as with our strategic priorities. Thank you, Jenna. That's all.
Any comments from the committee?
Yeah, just a couple. So what I'm hearing is that we're looking at sort of like our ongoing agenda item list and putting that into like an action plan. I right now see one that's missing that was in our minutes from today that we approved, which is the request for future information and a report on emergency preparedness related to food systems in our action plan. We already have a Asheville-Buncombe food action plan, but I wonder if that makes the most sense to put into a bucket of climate justice initiative and neighborhood resiliency scores. So when we're thinking about what needs to be in our work plan, when's the right place and time to bring those matters to staff?
So we'll have this a little bit. Thank you for that question. And that what you raised is an excellent point, that none of the strategic priority areas are mutually exclusive to any specific city council committee, and there's going to be overlap amongst all of them. So part of the approach that we're looking at is first taking the topics that we've already received from city council through committee conversations as well as other community dialogue, and looking at how do we map that out throughout the year, and then bringing that back to you to react to. So taking feedback we've gotten from previous committee meetings, from city council meetings and other discussions, potentially budget workshops, for example, and looking at how do we knit that together to align to the strategic priorities. And it may be, to your point, Councilmember Roney, that you're discussing items that pertain specifically to neighborhood resilience as well as to reimagining public safety. And you may hear from different advisory boards to that point as well, based on the projects and initiatives that they're working that are aligned to those priority areas. But immediate next steps are we're going to take a look at the existing planned items for upcoming city council committee agendas and try to plan out the next several months based on those topics to then give you something to respond to. And then we can kind of fill in the gaps or look at where do we need to reprioritize or shift those agendas to make sure that the work we're doing is better aligned with the ultimate vision of the committee and the city council.
Okay, well, thank you for that clarity. And in that case, I will say that on our agenda today, I didn't see sort of that list for future agenda items to include this. So I'll just restate the request for climate justice initiative and neighborhood resiliency. Additionally, I think with our comprehensive plan having interwoven equity being a key theme, for this committee to review the public safety core services with an equity lens, regularly reviewing outcomes to make sure that that's what we're getting out of our services to the public, I think would need to be part of our work plan.
Okay, and so we'll note that and we will include that in the list. And I know Jenna is working on pulling together that comprehensive list. So I apologize that that the climate justice item was missed, but we will certainly have that incorporated into what we bring back for this group to react to prior to finalizing the work plan.
Excellent, thank you so much.
Thank you, Rachel. Jenna, is there anyone in the speaker queue for public comment?
We do have one person in the speaker queue. Caller ending in 2266. Your line is open.
Hi, this is Grant Millen, and I have introduced the idea of a Housing Authority of City of Asheville livability study. And it's fine to bring up what happened with the safety and justice challenge work. That was $3.5 million from the MacArthur Foundation alone. And I don't know what the total budget has been up to today. But when you look at the Buncombe section of the MacArthur Safety and Justice Challenge website, you'll see that there's a dip in the crime issues that are affecting Asheville's African Americans and all of us related to COVID, but that the incarcerations of Asheville of African Americans in Buncombe County, and anyways, is up for whites, for European folks, background folks, it's gone down. So I'm all for things improving for folks living in, I think it's Asheville's public housing is where a lot of the violence happens. And I've looked at the Simplicity database, the APD Simplicity database, and looked at the crime trends for some of those public housing sites, and it's really disturbing because it's also about missing persons and runaways, and that's scary when we haven't surfaced that whole picture. And I asked to be a volunteer observer, unpaid observer with the Safety and Justice Challenge, and that didn't happen. But I'm interested in what folks like Keenan are doing. I've never heard his name before, and exposing the rest of the population in Asheville to this work would be valuable. But we need a Asheville public safety strategy that is about the whole picture here, about the illegally manufactured fentanyl deaths. That is something that we can't have. That's not 3 to 4 years out. The outcomes there have to start shifting faster than 3 to 4 years, Deborah. But I'm interested in this part of it, and we're going to have to.
Caller, you're at 3 minutes.
Thank you to our caller for calling in. That is all for our meeting today, unless there are any comments from staff or committee. There's a lot discussed, and we didn't really open it up to the rest of the staff members who are here with us. All right, being none, this meeting is adjourned.